26th Street, looking at trying to make that more safe for the citizens who turn there. I think we've got a serious problem there on 23rd Street, and I think it needs to be addressed by the city and then plan closely with the state of Utah. There has been, I think Jerry has done a beautiful survey just letting you know some of the things that he's seen. I have seen the same thing, but what has made me even sadder is to see the fatalities that have occurred there so far. Okay, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
Seeing no other public comments, we'll move on to our agenda. Number 4 is discussion on 2019 Municipalities Ramp Grant. Tiffany Staley, our Parks and Recreation Director.
Good evening, Council. A little bit of information for you and a little bit of history as I preface this. So in 2016, elections were held and a vote was put out to all the residents of North Ogden and Weber County. And a majority of those voters approved the ramp tax of 0.1% to be used towards, and this is from the ramp website, new and existing facilities for recreation, arts, museums, parks, and qualified cultural organizations and events to enhance the quality of life in Weber County and promote economic vitality. As part of that tax, there is 2 separate pieces to it. One is a grant application process, and the other is a municipal allocation. The regular and major grants, as part of that grant process, require a match from city and or private funding. Tonight I'm discussing the municipal allocation. So as voted on, this funding is distributed to cities in Weber County at $1 per person based on the latest census to be used for the recreation, arts, museums, and park projects and events that I mentioned. Your stewardship as a city council is to provide for the utilization of those funds for those purposes. The Parks and Recreation Department is recommending that the 2019 Ramp Municipalities allocation be utilized to add to and improve community events, including those at Barker Park. In the past, just by way of information, the Parks and Recreation Department has utilized municipalities' grant funding to help install volleyball courts, install park signage for the parks, a new playground at North Ogden Park this upcoming year, hand dryers and new drinking fountains at the park, and a walking path at Orton Park, and that's just been in the past 6 or so years. Some of the ideas that have been discussed and considered are a farmer's market, a music series in the park, community band performances, service or park cleanup days, community volunteer opportunities, Arbor Day and tree planting, movies in the park or at the pool, a trunk or treat community or business partnership event, the No Limits Half Marathon route change, and a holiday village or light celebration. And as a department, we feel that these types of events will meet the ramp objective of enhancing quality of life in Weber County and promoting economic vitality.
Any questions for Tiffany?
So Tiffany, is this allocation just because?
It's because of the tax. So the county residents voted to approve the tax, which includes an allocation of $1 per resident for those recreation, arts, museums, and parks reasons. It's just given to the cities to do those activities.
So we're looking at $10,000.
It's about $18,000.
About $18,000. Okay.
Separate from the grants, which
per household.
Yeah, separate from the grants, which do have to have matched funding, either from the city and or private sources. And just another piece of information, I attended the RAMP board meeting today, and they all voted to approve recommending to the Weber County Commission that North Ogden City receive an award of $312,779 for this current year to help finish the interior of the amphitheater. So
that's cool. So the $18,000 has to go to those things that couldn't go to like Longland View Park bathrooms, correct?
RAMP has discouraged us from utilizing that funding for restrooms.
That's what I understand. So what do you need from us?
Approval for the go-ahead. Some of the activities that we're looking at, especially the music series, require booking talent in advance. Typical for that industry is, usually a 6-month lead time to be able to make sure the performers are booked for that. I've been looking at that, so we would need to utilize some of that funding before July 1st. And then just your go-ahead to utilize that funding provided to the city for those purposes.
Tiffany, on the municipal grant, aside from the discouragement from using it, is it just on bathrooms or is it on infrastructure as a whole on that municipal?
They like to see it used for new infrastructure. They don't like to see replacement and repair. So new things, new facilities, they like to see that. Replacement, not so much.
So you gave us quite a list of things. You're not trying to do all of those with this grant?
No.
So are you going to?
We are looking into all of those things, and then whatever is most feasible or doable, and depending on the cost of those, is what we'll put into play.
So you just need us to say, yes, go
Yes,
ahead.
these types of events.
These types of events, and then you'll come back to us with what we're going to do it with.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And we'll also bring back a budget amendment for formal action, because if there is an expenditure of money, we just want to make sure that it's following the procedure. So before the money's spent, before that, we'll bring that back with Evan will bring it back as a budget amendment too.
So this says discussion, and it doesn't say, action, so we just
I think it'd be well at this point to give her the go-ahead.
We just need to say, I'm fine with it, because I'm fine with using it for whatever, they bring back and recommend. I mean.
So, well, for example, for a music series, we would need to start booking the talent. So if I have your go-ahead tonight, that's something that we would do. We would set out some dates, and we would go ahead and start booking talent to be there for a music series in the park.
Being like what do you mean by music series?
Local bands, we've looked into the options of Ryan Shoup and the Rubber Band, or Peter Brian Holt, or similar types of events to have music in the park. Perhaps on a Monday night running series for a few weeks, or a Friday night series for a few weeks.
Maybe you could help clarify for me. So I thought we couldn't really effectively use the amphitheater because we weren't done with the next phase.
So as far
there was
as
the limitation.
Yes, and so we're planning to start work on the amphitheater as soon as we can get that funding made available, especially with this opportunity of the new grant that's becoming available. There is electricity there, but it is limited as to what we can do. And so in our research and looking into performers, we've had to make some adaptations as to who can come and who cannot based on what we have available and their requirements to come into the facility.
So I think we could, if I remember right from the discussion we had about funding the next phase, the council, if I remember right, was okay using the apron of the facility, and that's what we're talking about, is essentially everything in front of the big garage door that rolls down, because it's the interior that is kind of the area that's still unfinished that we want to get finished before we give public access to that portion of the building. But we can pull up the dates for when that discussion happened. I don't have them right now.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted that clarification,
And on the other vein too is we may not be able to fund that with this, so it may be something else.
A lot of, not all of the events also would require use of the amphitheater. Say a trick-or-treat event, we've looked into that and decided that maybe the Aquatic Center parking lot would be the best location for that. It wouldn't be held at Barker Park or utilize the amphitheater at all. But we feel like the flow of traffic in and out of that parking lot would make a good venue for that event.
So in essence, when it says we are requesting permission to book talent events, prior to final approval of the fiscal year 2020 budget. So you're asking to have money before. So when do we get this allocation? This $20,000?
It usually comes actually in this fiscal year, but is budgeted into the next one as approved July 1st.
So
for activities, I guess, after July 1st.
So we get it before July 1st.
We do.
The $20,000 allocation.
A lot of it depends on how fast RAMP sends out their checks.
I'm okay with it.
Has Evan looked at that? We can do that.
So,
Yeah, we will get the money, yes. So, yes, we can do it.
Okay. Well, I think it's a great idea. I think we need to show the citizens that we're using the amphitheater area. So I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Bill?
I'm good. Like it.
Yes. Cheryl?
Yeah.
Okay, you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Next item is quarterly financial report. Our presenter will be John Call in the absence of Evan Nielsen, who is ill at this time.
So, council, this is something that the council asked for the finance department to bring you every quarter. We used to be doing it, I think, about every 6 months. So this is a little more often than usual, as well as you still get those monthly updates. Have you all been receiving those monthly budget updates from the finance department? They should be emailed out to you. If not, let me know. We can make sure you're all getting those. But I'm going to bring up this graph. This is probably the most. This is the full detailed analysis of the budget report, and it includes several graphs as well as all of the detail of what's actually been occurring in all of the various general ledger accounts. The first thing that we typically focus on is our sales tax trend. The red line is what the city's actually received this year.
Excuse me.
The purple line is what we received last year, and then the green line is what we projected to be receiving. So you can see the red line and the green line cross each other a couple times. Currently for this year, we've received $22,000 more than we expected to receive in the budget year. And that equates to about $2. For every $100 we thought we were going to receive in sales tax, we've received $102. So if that makes sense. And that's usually at this part of the year, we actually are a little bit higher than that as far as what we've received. But if you remember, council, last year as we did the budget, we were a little more aggressive with our sales tax and growth anticipation. But even with that more aggressive look, we're still above what we anticipated receiving. But just to avoid any conclusion or any confusion, we're not 2% above the estimated increase. So we estimated we'd get 6% as an increase. We're not at 8% on sales tax. We're on it's like 6.2% or 6.02%. So think of it. It's a much smaller number, but we're still in the positive. The other thing, or the next item is kind of a revenue and expenditure by funds. If any of these lines were touching the top of this chart, that would mean that we had either received 100% of the revenues that we expected, which would be the blue line, or we had expended 100% of those general ledger accounts for the year, which is the red line. There's a couple red lines who are above the 50% line, which is where we were on January 1. That's the Aquatic Center is one of those for expenditures, but that's because the majority of the Aquatic Center season falls after July 1st. And so the rest of it won't come in until we open the doors at the beginning of this season, and it's a shorter season at the end of the fiscal year than the beginning. So that's not unusual. Same thing with the motor pool and the police motor pool. Most of our expenditures come at the beginning of the year as we're buying vehicles and doing the equipment installs. And the remainder of those expenditures that kind of trickle in throughout the year are the maintenance items, tires or gas or things like that come out of those two funds. Everything else in general is below budget for where we're at in the fiscal year. And you can see that the lowest one right now is the Capital Improvement Fund. That's in large part because of the ramp grant. We had, as when we amended the budget at the end of last calendar year in December, November timeframe, we anticipated the revenue from ramp and we anticipated the expenditure, but none of those have actually happened yet. Just because, as we talked about, we weren't going to do those until we came back to the council with an actual plan showing that we got the grant and what it would be spent on specifically. So that's why that one's so low. And then the transportation impact and the transportation sales tax money, that's money we were expecting to receive, but we actually hadn't programmed any expenditures in for this year. largely because we're saving that money up to expend on the road widening up 400 and 450 East next spring. So that, as you come into the next budget, or as we're doing the budget we're working on now, you'll see those revenues and expenditures, in particular expenditures, will go up significantly. So any questions about those? And if you do have any other questions about specific funds, all the information for these is down lower in this 50-page document. And if you need some help, Evan or I or the mayor can help direct you to where that information is. We also do a specific analysis at the general fund account. So this is the account that's funded by tax dollars, property tax, sales tax, motor vehicle tax, and all the other kind of special taxes that people pay, whether they're residents or whether they're doing business in the city. And the one that is over the halfway point for the year is our non-departmental, and that's where our insurance comes out of. So the building and vehicle insurance, and we do that payment once a year. So the majority of that money is the one-time payment for that. And is it about
July? We do that.
We do it in July, and do you know how much that is in that? So it's $100 and something thousand. So it's a significant expense, and it comes out right at the beginning of the fiscal year. So that line will always seem high because of that expense that we do right at the beginning. Most of our health insurance, for example, comes out on a monthly basis, so that amount doesn't hit the general fund at the same time. Any questions about any of those accounts? Okay, and then the rest of this document is all just the details. And you can see if you look at the first couple pages, let me go down to past our assets and liabilities. So if you went to page 6, this is where it starts talking about all the different revenues that the city receives. Several of these revenues are collected by the state and then passed on to us, like sales tax or the motor vehicle tax, things like that. We do also collect a significant amount for licenses and permits. Those are building licenses or animal licenses. We've collected $60 for chicken licenses. So if you have your chickens, get them licensed. But anyways, that's the revenue, and typically those are the general fund revenues. The enterprise fund revenues are shown further down in the document, and those are what come in through the utility bills that are sent out to our residents. And essentially all of those funds are on track for what we've been programming this year. Any questions? And this is probably where we'll stop the discussion unless the council has specific questions about funds or what's going on. We like to do this every quarter so that the council has a chance to just steer us if you think that we're not on track for what the budget had planned for.
Questions or concerns from the council?
Thanks for the report.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Next item number 6, presentation on the amendment to revise setback standards for accessory buildings in residential zones. That will be presented by Rob Scott, our planning director.
Thanks, Mayor, council, and audience. Back in mid-December, a citizen, Brent Call, came before the city council and requested that they consider making an amendment to our accessory building setback standards in the RE20 zone. And previous to that time, he and I had chatted about his specific circumstance regarding his desire to build a fairly large hay barn, and how that in an amendment that we had conducted back in 2018, we had adjusted some setbacks that was going to cause him some challenges with side yard setbacks. So John's got a picture of a portion of what Mr. Call put together. As we further deliberated this discussion, he and I went through the ordinance. We looked for various solutions, and we couldn't find one in the existing ordinance. So he was kind enough, and a lot of times people come in and they kind of throw up their hands and say, solve my problem. Well, Mr. Call didn't just do that. He went out and did some research on his own, came up with an attached nice report that you have in your packet, and identified a couple of options for the city to consider relating to setbacks. So the current ordinance, the way it stands right now, is that it's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. And what Mr. Call identified as an approach was from another city. Wasn't it Layton? I think it was Layton City. And what they had done was they came up with a couple of different options, but had more of, instead of you hit one threshold and it's this, more of along the lines of a sliding scale. So the ordinance related to basically the higher the building height, the greater the setback. So you start out at 15 feet and then you work from there. Our existing ordinance also has provisions that relate to maximum sizes of buildings, and those we felt already have addressed those sufficiently. So basically what we're talking about is the bigger the building, so we have up to 600 feet, and then you hit 600 feet, you become a large accessory building. You have different standards at that point in time, and then also a combination of the height. So that way you end up with a combination of standards that relate to the massing of buildings and their potential impact on adjoining uses. So if I'm giving you too much planning jargon, I apologize. In any case, so we took his report, staff did a little analysis on it. We concluded which of the two options that we preferred. We discussed that with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission said go ahead and conduct a public hearing. They also suggested that instead of just having a sliding scale for the RE20 zone, that we would apply that to also all of our single-family zones. And so that's what you have before you is an amendment that relates to a sliding scale for both the RE20 and also the R1 zones. So that's the reason why you have those two tables that are included in the ordinance. I think that's pretty clear. Hopefully that's clear. In terms of the conformance to the general plan, we regularly bring ordinances before the council for consideration for amendment based on trying to make things more appropriate, have, as the general plan says, high-quality building and design standards, and to proactively evaluate current ordinances and to work with homeowners and other individuals to identify how those things should be accommodated. So the summary of considerations are: should the accessory building setback standards be modified with a sliding scale, and is the amendment consistent with the general plan? The Planning Commission, after holding a public hearing on they didn't have all of the members there, but on a 5-0 vote, recommends adoption of the amendment. The Planning Commission found that the amendment is consistent with the general plan. With that, council members, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Rob regarding this amendment? Yes.
So Rob, just you may remember, maybe you weren't, you may not remember that when they built the accessory building that was the one that unfortunately was burnt, how would that have affected this?
That was the ordinance that I referenced earlier, that specific amendment that he ran into an issue with. And so this amendment would still have a, I'll say, a positive effect on that particular structure, because we still have a separation factor that is retained in the ordinance that will not impact Mr. Call and his project.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions, council?
All I had.
Thank you.
Public comments.
Thank you, Rob. On this particular agenda item, if there are public comments, anybody would like to come forward may do so.
Brent Call, 835 East, 2100 North, and I'll just make the same comments that I made with the Planning Commission, that I really appreciate the city's quick response on addressing this and how cooperative everybody's been. Mr. Scott was very helpful in trying to help address this, as well as the council and the Planning Commission, and so I just want to compliment the city and urge you to go ahead and approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, excuse me. Be discussion or action to consider an ordinance amending the setback standards for accessory buildings in residential zones, as has been presented by Rob Scott, our planning director.
We have an ordinance number.
2019-03.
Mayor, I'd move that we approve ordinance 2019-03, amending setback standards for accessory buildings in residential zones as presented by Rob Scott and recommended by our Planning Commission.
It's been moved by Councilman Swanson to approve the ordinance amending the North Ogden City Ordinance, ordinance number 2019-03.
Second.
A second by Councilwoman Stoker. Start with the voting. Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilman Severie?
Yes.
Councilman Turner?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next item is presenting or amending the North Ogden zoning ordinance to adjust the requirements for fences on retaining walls. This is presented by Brandon Bell, our associate planner.
Just gonna finish up a quick drawing.
Also our artist in residence.
Put NTS on there, not to scale. Make sure you-
That's right.
We playing Pictionary, we gotta guess what you're drawing, or?
I would be happy to explain.
How did he do, Cecil?
Sorry?
Did he do well?
He did well.
Excellent.
Okay, so, good evening, Mayor and members of the council. This ordinance arose, this ordinance amendment, the concern and request for it arose when a resident in North Ogden City had the desire for a 6-foot tall fence on top of a retaining wall, and discovered that our current ordinance does not allow it to happen. And so this is not currently permitted under city ordinance. The resident spoke to the council in December of 2018, and then the Planning Commission has discussed and reviewed drafts of this potential ordinance in prior meetings on January 9th, January 23rd, and February 6th of this year. The proposed ordinance before you tonight is a result of the discussion and review at those meetings. This ordinance reflects changes that were requested by the applicant as well as the Planning Commission, and it's been written, the ordinance as currently constituted has been written to allow 6-foot fences for many residents with retaining walls, and to ensure that residents are able to have privacy whenever that privacy does not create too great of a visual impact for neighbors and the public. A minimum of 3, so there's a maximum height of 6 feet allowed on top of retaining walls under this ordinance amendment if it's adopted, but there's also a minimum required fence height of 3.5 feet for the purpose of addressing safety concerns, and specifically the minimization of falls, or the lowering the likelihood of falls.
However, if a retaining wall is greater than 5 feet in height, a certain amount of transparency is required in the fence in order to lessen the visual impact for neighbors and the public of a fence on top of a retaining wall. John, could you pull up the portion in the staff report that shows the table of different concerns for different parties? It's important to note that there's, depending on literally which side of the fence or retaining wall you're on, there's different concerns. And so this ordinance, we've tried to draft it in a manner that meets what we anticipate would be the typical concerns of different parties on different sides of the fence. And this table expresses that. So one of the issues that the ordinance requires is that it requires transparency so that someone doesn't have, say, a 6-foot retaining wall and then a solid fence on top of it. That's also completely not able to be seen through if the fence is within is basically right on top of the retaining wall. And so the different concerns for different parties that we, as we thought about this issue from different angles, is there's two main parties. There's the applicant or the fence builder, and there's the neighbor and the public. The neighbor and the public are going to tend to have the same concerns because they're going to be in the same situation of looking from the outside in onto the property. And then depending on the reason why I drew these two pictures is one of them has the retaining wall where it's visible from the street or from the neighbor's property, and because the high side of the retaining wall is on the fence builder's property, and then the other drawing shows where the retaining wall is actually not visible from the outside. And is where the property owner's property is recessed below the level of the street or the neighbor's property. So it's sunk down in as opposed to rising up above the adjoining properties. And so those different situations create different concerns for different parties. And so that's what this table is about. We've striven to write the ordinance so it addresses all of these different concerns in the same set of standards. And so where the applicant and fence builder is on the high side of the fence and the retaining wall, there could be a concern about too high of a fall. The response to that was the minimum fence height. And then also a lack of privacy could be a concern, which is why we, in this ordinance, are allowing up to 6 feet. So that, again, that's the minimum of 3.5 feet, and then still allowing up to 6 feet. Whereas the current ordinance does not allow necessarily a 6-foot fence. It's measured a lot differently than it is under this ordinance, the height of the fences. Where the applicant and the fence builder are on the low side of the fence and retaining wall, they could be concerned about a lack of privacy. And so again, with the minimum height, the maximum 6 feet, that is addressed as well by preventing it from being too low of a fence. Where the neighbor and the public are on the high side of the fence and the retaining wall, they could be concerned about too high of a fall. Or they could be concerned about too easy to fall. With a minimum fence height of 3.5 feet, we believe that concern is alleviated. This is also, the 3.5 foot standard is consistent with the International Building Code, where it requires a similar 3.5 foot minimum. Actually, theirs might be 30 inches, I can't remember, but it's somewhere in this same range of when there's a 30-inch fall, then they have to have a 3.5 foot minimum fence, I believe is what it is, height. And then in the situation where the neighbor and public are on the low side of the fence and the retaining wall, they may be concerned about too high of a visual barrier, so that you're looking at too high of a wall. That, and the response to that in this ordinance is having a transparency requirement. So you're still allowed a 6-foot fence. It just has to have a 50% minimum transparency so that people can actually see into it from the outside. If it's on top of, I think it's a 5-foot high retaining wall or greater. And so the point is, we tried to balance this from the full range of typical concerns that you would have in these different situations, so that we're not creating conflicts between neighbors where different parties aren't having their basic interests or concerns met. So the Planning Commission recommended this version of the ordinance with one change from the last prior version of the ordinance. They recommended it on a 6-1 vote, 6 for the amendment and 1 against, with the caveat that they recommended one change to the ordinance, which has been incorporated into this version being presented tonight. The recommended change in the amendment addresses the issue of when a degree of transparency for fences on retaining walls is not required. And so, let's see, the 6 of the 7 commissioners recommended the change that I'll discuss in a moment, and one of them recommended that there not be the recommended change in this version. The current version of the ordinance adds a provision that allows transparency requirements for a fence to not apply when that fence and the exposed surface of the retaining wall on which it is located are both fully on the same parcel of property as the low side of the retaining wall, and the applicant is the owner of that parcel. So the point is that when both the fence and the retaining wall are on the same property as is owned by the builder of the fence, and the builder of the fence owns the low side of the property compared to the retaining wall on the fence, the transparency concerns are not as big of a deal because they're the person that has to look at their fence and their retaining wall. So the point is that they can make a decision themselves about what sort of visual impact they want to have on themselves and their yard, because they're the one that actually has to deal with that visual impact. So if they're building it, say, actually this is what the case is with Cecil, the resident who applied. His property is sunken down below the level of the street and the adjoining neighbors, and he is building a retaining wall on his property, and I don't know the exact height, but let's say it's 3 feet, and then he wants to build a 6-foot fence on top of it. He's going to be looking out from his home and his backyard at that fence and retaining wall. And so since it's all on his property, the ordinance states he gets to choose. He's not required to follow those transparency requirements. If it were the opposite, where the retaining wall was facing the neighbor and the neighbor was the lower property side owner, and they were looking at it then the transparency requirements would come into place if the retaining wall were, say, over 5 feet. So I'll go ahead and just give you a brief rundown of the actual ordinance itself to go through the different provisions of it. So the first section states that retaining wall and grading surrounding them must comply with our grading and drainage standards, which were recently adopted. Fence height, when they're constructed on the high side of a retaining wall within 3 feet of the top back of a retaining wall, shall have a maximum height of 6 feet and then a minimum height of 3.5 feet. That's measured from the finished grade on which that the fence is constructed. So wherever the fence is resting and constructed, that's where you measure the height from. That's very different from our current ordinance. And that applies when the retaining wall is at least 2.5 feet or greater. Let's see. The next main point is in provision B, where it states that this is an extra detail that the public right-of-way or that when there's a public right-of-way or trail on the high side of a retaining wall that's 2.5 feet or greater in height, then the public right-of-way or trail is within 5 feet of that retaining wall, and a fence is in between those two, then then there's a minimum fence height of 3.5 feet required. The point being that if there's a trail right next to a retaining wall and you install a fence, if you install a small fence and it's not a minimum height, then you're actually increasing the likelihood of falls because just of people's center of gravity. If it's not a certain height of, say, 3.5 feet and they hit that, then they're more likely to fall over. You're increasing risk there. And then the next issue is fence transparency. There's a minimum fence transparency for when a fence is built on top of a retaining wall that is 5 feet or less in height of 0%. So these transparency requirements don't come into play until a retaining wall hits 5 feet or greater. When the retaining wall is 5 feet up to 8 feet in height, then there's a minimum fence transparency requirement of 50%. And when the retaining wall is greater than 8 feet, then the requirement for fence transparency is 80%. Now, there are some existing retaining walls that are greater than 8 feet. They wouldn't be allowed under our current ordinances, but they predated our existing grading and ordinances and retaining wall ordinances. But the majority of retaining walls that will be constructed, all of the retaining walls that would be constructed to this point would be less than 8 feet. Their maximum height, I believe, of 6 feet. But there will be some where that will apply because of existing retaining walls. Then the next couple points go over that the transparency requirements do not apply if the fence and the retaining wall are all on the same property that's owned by the low side property owner. And then let's see. And then the other situation in which they don't apply is where a fence is built on the high side of a retaining wall and a public right-of-way or trail is directly adjacent to the property where the fence is built. I think that covers the main points of the ordinance. I know that's a lot of detail. This is the result of, I think, 3 planning commission meetings that we've discussed it and refined the ordinance. What questions do you have for me that I can help clarify?
Questions for Brandon?
I don't have any.
I think they did great work. Frank?
Very well done, thank you.
You bet.
Any public comments regarding this ordinance?
Cecil Roads, 3098 North, 750 East. I would like to thank Brandon and Mr. Call for stepping up to the plate, and the commission and the council for getting me these things. John, you were instrumental. He's my neighbor, 2 houses away. He understands what my concerns were with the previous ordinance involving fences on retaining walls. So makes me happy. I'll go home and sleep well tonight, and I hope you all do as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
We haven't voted yet, Cecil.
See no other comments, council would entertain a motion regarding this ordinance.
Mayor, I'll move that we approve ordinance 2019-04, amending the North Ogden City zoning ordinance to adjust requirement for fences on retaining walls as discussed and presented by Brandon Bell.
And we have a motion from Councilman Swanson regarding the ordinance amending the North Ogden City ordinance to adjust the requirements for fence and retaining walls. That ordinance is 2019-04. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
A second by Councilman Severine.
Mayor, can I, just as I was, one thing I'd recommend is in the other, or in this version of the ordinance, it doesn't say which subsections of this code we're changing. And so I would recommend that we add this that says we're amending sections D, which is what Brandon went through, as well as section, E, not F. Just to make it clear for the folks who are inputting this online that we're not touching A through C, we're only amending D and E.
Okay, with that clarification.
Yeah, I'll amend my motion to include text to be amended in 11-1-11 D and E.
Okay. It's been amended. Seconded by Councilman Severine.
I'll second that.
Okay. Begin the voting with Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilman Severine?
Yes.
Councilman Turner?
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Now you can sleep well.
Next item, item 8, presentation and discussion on form-based code. The presenter will be by Brandon Bell, our associate planner.
Do we have the PowerPoint? Thanks. Good evening again. This will be a little bit less detail-oriented than the fence ordinance. So we covered the form-based code that's been prepared for the city a number of times before this body. We've covered it probably at least 12 meetings in detail at the Planning Commission. And then I think this is our third or fourth presentation to you. I'm just going to go over some very high-level highlights of the basic idea behind the code, but also some data that backs up the support for the type of communities that form-based code is intended to create. I think that that's become a germane and relevant topic in this discussion. So you'll notice I've got 4 pictures here. 3 of these are, or a couple of these are from national examples of walkable communities. This one's in Texas. This is in Virginia. It's Maryland, actually. This is actually 9th and 9th, and you'll notice that this is our beloved North Ogden. This is the Cannery Center here in North Ogden, and so this is a nationally recognized and well-used pattern. These types of communities. This is the development that has been around for centuries and even thousands of years, and so it's a very common development pattern. And North Ogden has its own proud legacy of this type of development, something that we are familiar with in Weber County and in our area. These are some more examples of it. Again, the key element of form-based code, if you just break it down to nuts and bolts, one of the most fundamental elements that separates it from drivable suburban development is the location of the parking and the relationship of the building to the sidewalk and the street. You'll notice in all of these examples, the building is directly adjacent to the sidewalk or the landscaping that adjoins the sidewalk. You have some townhomes, and these could be what are called live-work units as well, where office and could be, or small retail shops could be on the ground floor, and then residential living units up above. This is a little pedestrian plaza in front of a bakery, and then this is an example in Holiday. This is actually, and if you have time, I'd encourage you to go visit this. This is part of the Ogden Riverbend development, just behind the America First on around 21st South in Ogden. And so we have our own examples of this type of development that's coming very close to home. One of the other key elements that you can't see from those types of photos of this type of pattern of development is a gridded street network. This serves a number of purposes. One thing is it provides a multiple number of routes for automobiles. And so automobiles don't have to rely on one main arterial. They have options if there's traffic jams and if it's a busy time of day. And then in addition to that, that also has a very strong benefit for the pedestrian, which allows the pedestrian to have a manageable block size so that they can have a shorter path from wherever they're living or working to the main downtown area. You'll also notice this small circle, which is called a pedestrian shed. It's a very thin line. There's 2 of them on this image. One of the principles in this is that there should be a limit to the amount, like if you're going to reasonably have people walk, that they have everything they need within somewhere between a quarter and a half mile of the center of town, and where they walk to. And beyond that, people's willingness to walk really decreases. And so there are exceptions to that. There's modifications of that pedestrian shed that apply, but this is sort of the typical prototype model of what's called a pedestrian shed that you start off with. And then it's contrasted here with what's more typical and dominant in our area of this drivable suburban. This isn't a value judgment. It's just trying to accurately describe the differences between these 2 types of development. In our form-based code, which is referred to as the downtown code, there are 3 primary subdistricts. There's the downtown Main Street subdistrict, there's the downtown Market subdistrict, and the downtown neighborhood subdistrict. The downtown Market is a specialized subdistrict. It's the way that the map's currently set up, it's primarily to the west of the America First on the south side of 2600 North. In that area, I'll show you a little more. The downtown Main Street is probably the most predominant element, and it's intended to create a walkable Main Street and downtown for North Ogden. It allows the most intense concentration of buildings. You'll see a storefront building here where the first floor could be inhabited by retail, office, or other commercial uses, as well as with the stories above that to be used for either office or residential. And so you can allow a mix of uses within the same building. And so this is the most urban compact subdistrict that allows the most possibilities for different types of uses. And then the downtown neighborhood still involves a lot of residential living, but it's in a more compact urban living form. And so that's an overview of these subdistricts. This is the map that's been prepared for the downtown code. Before I forget, I would like to address one thing. As from the last time that we met with you, staff has discussed the possibility of limiting the proposal for adoption to 2300 to the south. We recognize that there's the widening that is going to be occurring in the next year or two along the intersection of Washington and 2600. We've also mentioned that to the Planning Commission. They haven't made a formal decision on that because they haven't considered the ordinance as a whole. But we think there's a lot of merit to that idea of because there's the area surrounding 2600 North is fairly well developed, and it's at the beginning of its life cycle as commercial development. It's high quality development that's gone in the recent years, and it's also the development pattern is heavily auto oriented. And so whereas the property to the south of 2300 North is not nearly as well developed, or it's at the end of its life cycle in terms of being ready, more ripe for redevelopment. And there's also a lot of undeveloped property that would make it easier for new development to go in there without having to switch the location of the building and the difficulty that would present to adjoining property owners, et cetera. So you'll see this purple is the downtown Main Street. There's also required streets that would need to be put in order to create the smaller block sizes that we just referenced. Many of those are shown. Some of them are not shown because they would just be invoked by the maximum block size requirements that are present in the code. But these would allow us to attain the block size requirements so that it would be a walkable area feasibly for pedestrians. The next couple things, that's kind of, again, I said I was going to be a very high-level overview of the code, and hopefully I succeeded at that. But I'd like to go into some demographic information to provide a broader context. I know there's been some concern from residents about the code, but there's a lot of data that's out there that I felt I wanted to just give you an overview of. It's important to understand that there's a mountain of research out there regarding millennials and the changing preference for development pattern and the way that they want to live, the way they want to raise their family and live their lives. They constitute 24% of the population. Here it says ages 18 to 36. Probably it's more accurate at this point that they're 21 to 39. And they're 77 million strong. They're 24% of the population, and they are becoming a very significant force in the economy. They are the generation that's currently trying to figure out where they want to live, what they want to do with their lives, and what sort of families they want to raise and where they want to do it. And so they're big decision makers in the economy. The American dream is changing for them. It's very different than what it's been for past generations, and it can, I think, be summarized that it's transitioning from an American dream of the white picket fence with the single-family home in the suburbs to the historic brownstone stoop and other moderate density dwelling types in the heart of the city. The past generations, one value that they have looked for is the idea of independence and privacy, and what millennials are looking more for is interactivity, community, and convenience. So there's differing values, but in that same breath, everyone still wants to be able to have a dignified form of living, and so the movement is trying to look for is towards looking for ways that allow more compact forms of development that allow that interactivity, convenience, and community, but that allow them to do so in a way that's dignified and that meets their needs. And these preferences obviously have a big effect on cities and towns. 62% of millennials prefer to live in the type of mixed-use communities that are found in urban centers that are close to shops, restaurants, and offices. They're currently living in these urban areas at a higher rate than any other generation, and growth in U.S. cities outpaces growth outside of those cities for the first time since the 1920s. So this is a C-scale change and shift in preferences. Now, before you feel like I may have left someone out, I'm going to talk about Utah's preferences in general. That's millennials. The reason why I mention them is because they're decision makers for our economy, whose lifestyle preferences are currently making some of the biggest decisions about where to live and what type of development is needed. But we have really great data that's been provided to us in the last few years by Envision Utah about what Utahns specifically, regardless of their age or generation, are interested in having. I wasn't able to get the year on this, but I believe it's been from at least 2014 or later that this survey came out. There was a survey that was conducted by Envision Utah, which is a nonprofit planning group that seeks to provide information to Utah to help ensure a high quality of life and quality growth patterns. And what they did was they did a survey of 54,000 Utahns. It was actually, at the time, they have stated that it was the largest community visioning survey that's ever been conducted. It was a massive effort. I think it took about 3 years. And there was just a massive amount of work and time that went into it. These are some of the key takeaways from it. 78% of Utahns, they were given a number of scenarios to select from that balanced transportation costs, compact forms, neighborhoods and forms of living, infrastructure costs, things like that. 78% of Utahns, I'm going to read the text blurb over here that gives you the summary of the data in the orange bars. 78% of Utahns selected a scenario in which communities include a variety of housing options and are designed for convenient walking, transit, and short drives, keeping housing and transportation costs reasonable. And so this was, again, we talked for a couple slides about millennials, but it's important to note that this was independent of age. This was 78% of Utahns are looking for more compact forms of living that help allow greater convenience to stores, to workplaces, and that reduce transportation costs is probably the best summary I can give you, as well as access to transit. There were a number of reasons why they wanted these diverse housing and transportation options. And to summarize that, it states Utahns want a diverse mix of housing types so that many people can afford decent homes and so that those with lower incomes can live in desirable neighborhoods, improving opportunity for them and their children. They also want to reduce how much each household spends on transportation. Utahns also recognize that in order to achieve this, they'll need to make trade-offs, and they've expressed their preference to make those trade-offs, that they're very willing to have more communities allow a variety of housing types other than large lot single-family homes, including small lot townhomes, small lot single-family homes, townhomes, apartments, duplexes, mother-in-law, and basement apartments. They are also willing to make trade-offs such as an increase in traffic congestion even in their neighborhood in order to get an overall shorter time on the road because of a shorter commute because they live next to a mixed-use urban center. They are also willing to accommodate a mixed-use center within a mile of them, and they are also willing to accommodate varying forms of transportation, including pedestrians and cyclists, even if it has a little bit of an impact on the maximizing the ultimate convenience for cars. So it's not that cars would go away in any sense, or that they would not be workable as a transportation option, but that there would be a little bit of a balancing of different forms of transportation, so that other forms can be, such as pedestrian transit and biking, can be convenient as well. This slide is just intended to communicate that form-based code deals not just with the design guidelines like the facade, but they deal with, again, the location of the building, the block size. You'll notice these streets, with requiring streets to go through the back and vehicular access to be provided from the rear typically, and as the most common form. And then you'll notice a mix of housing types on this block. And you have an apartment building right next to some shops, some single-family homes here, and then some townhomes, and they're all on the same block. And so that allows people of varying incomes to be able to live in proximity to one another. There's three priorities in development depending on which side of the development process you're on. There's generally three parties involved. There's consumer demand and preference of residents, cities and towns, and then developers. Developers, in order to stay alive, they need to make a profit. But in order to make cities happy, cities need high-quality community character. That's often what they are tending to look for. Consumer demand and resident preferences, at this point in time, there's a very strong national and local preference and shift towards walkable, compact communities. But where we get something that starts to become really workable and that people are interested in is when you have all three of these overlap. And so that's the role of form-based code. The intent of form-based code is to create a product that is profitable for a developer. So because developers can often get demonized, but what we have to remember about developers is that in order to get new houses, they have to be able to make $1. And so it's easy to demonize them, but if we write ordinances that don't make it feasible for them to develop, then the alternative won't be an even better form of housing. It will be no housing at all. And so we have to balance the need for profit with these other two of the high quality community character and density and compact walkable neighborhoods for both cities and consumer demand and preference. Form-based code is intended to deliver all three of these so that the city's long-term interest is met, the developer's short-term interest is met, and the consumers' demand for walkable neighborhood is met. It's intended to address the segment of the market that wants that those compact walkable neighborhoods. I'll go ahead and this is just. I just wanted to also give you. I didn't have. There's a lot of economic data out there about the value of form-based code, what it can do for an economy. I just wanted to give you one example of that. I sent out a couple of years ago PowerPoint that was presented by a gentleman named Joe Minicozy, who did some work for Ogden City, and unfortunately I couldn't find that. There was just a wealth of information in that, and unfortunately it's been removed from YouTube where I previously located it. But if I ever find that, I'd love to share it with you, because there's a tremendous amount of information on form-based code actually increasing property values, increasing retail sales tax revenues, and therefore increasing the contributions to a city's bottom line, and also doing so in a way that efficiently uses land, because not only does it increase the property of the land or the value of the land overall, but the dollar per acre that it gets when sold, and the amount that can be taxed on. And so this is an example in Roanoke, Texas. One of the similarities that it shares to North Ogden is that we have, in North Ogden, we have a very fast thoroughfare. Theirs isn't as fast, but it does have similar elements where the public realm, which is the space between the buildings on one side and the buildings on the other, is not well defined. We have some things that aren't necessarily contributing to the quality of that public realm with the power poles. And this is before they adopted their form-based code. In full disclosure and fairness, they did make some public investments in order to change the quality of their public realm. These street lights that were put in and the the sidewalk that was added and the upgraded street were a result of public investment. They decided that it was so important to their bottom line economically as a city that they were willing to make these investments as a public investment. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we take the same route, but I am saying that there is great value in understanding that form-based code has the ability to be an asset to the community economically. The reason why is if you look at a lot of the business models that are succeeding in our new economy, you'll find that what they're really doing is they're offering you something for free that's not an economic transaction before you engage in an economic transaction. So as an example, on the internet, you go to Google, you type in information, and they give you information back. Before you've ever done anything economic that comes close to a transaction, you've given them something, which is what? Information. They use that information to market to you products, et cetera, where you also got something out for free, which is search results, right? So, and what they've got is the ability to have information about you that they can then market to you in future searches and the more time you spend on the internet. Well, this has a corollary in physical space. If you within the last 5 years or so, Station Park in Farmington has come online. It's had tremendous success. The retailers there are doing very well. And what they do is they're offering you something for free as a consumer before you engage in an economic transaction, which is, in this case, instead of them offering you, search results, they are offering, what you're being offered is a place to come, to be social, to spend time with your family or your friends, or to watch your kids play. There's open space, things like that. And so the amenity that's provided for free in form-based code is the public open space and high quality public open space that makes you there, so you're not there strictly for an economic transaction. Because consumers, one of the main things that consumers are missing in is, as far as their needs, is they're missing a high quality public realm where they can go and enjoy themselves and not have it be either strictly business or doing things at home. And so this offers them a way for them to go out and have a good time, and then the businesses that are associated with that development that are adjacent to the public realm that the residents are enjoying and getting for free, they voluntarily spend money because they want to, because they're spending 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours there, and it ends up increasing the property the cost of the property, the price of the property, and getting an increased economic return as well. So this is one example. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but prior to the adoption of this form-based code, the average taxable value in this area was $4.06 per square foot, and that was in 2006. In 2012, after these public investments and the adoption of the form-based code, the average taxable value per acre or per square foot of land was $12.25, and so it was essentially tripled in value. And this is a really great number. The average annual restaurant sales was $600 per square foot. Now, I believe I just did some rough numbers. That's at, say, a 1,500 square foot restaurant, that's I think $1.2 million per year. $600 per square foot is a really spectacular number. I know that in a prior lecture from the person who taught me about this form-based code, people come from miles around because they're looking for this amenity in their life. They're driving 30, 40, 50 miles to get to this small town in Roanoke, Texas, to get to this sort of high-quality public environment. So I just wanted to share some of those insights with you and open the time up for discussion. If you have any questions for me, I'm willing to entertain them, but I'd love to hear a great public discussion on this topic.
Questions for Brandon?
Brandon, when you say consider direction, what do you mean by that?
Sorry, when I say what?
When it says on here 8B, discussion and or action to consider direction on form-based code, what are you looking for?
It was my understanding that I I don't know who put this on the agenda. I was asked to present, but it was my understanding that the intent was to have a discussion between the council whether they wanted to pursue the form-based code or move on or consider other options or consider limited adoption. I know that there's been work on the part of staff, but there's also been discussion by the Planning Commission and the City Council. And so I think that we're trying to gauge whether there's a consensus of either pursuing the form-based code or not pursuing the form-based code.
Brandon, as I was looking through your information this last, since we received it, I took some time to look at Roanoke, Texas from an aerial standpoint. One of the things I noticed that's very different about Roanoke, Texas is the area that you're talking about is a pretty succinct and separate area from the rest of town. The main highways, the speed roads, just so that people understand. Can I use do you mind if I use the board, Mayor?
Go ahead.
Just so everybody understands what I'm looking at here.
Are you going to draw pictures?
Not nearly as well as Brandon. You understand why I didn't go into art. But essentially, in Roanoke, Texas, you have a highway that comes in like this. You have another highway that comes in like this, and they kind of merge into this spaghetti thing going this way. There's a series of railroad tracks that come along like this. There's a front street that comes along right next to the tracks. All of the housing, most of the housing, which would be more like the urban, if you look at it, it's curved streets. It's not a grid pattern at all, is all up in this area here. The area that picture's taken of is a little rectangular area that is, yeah, right here. There's a little bit of housing and some business in here, but some single family lots. But this is the main area. There's a traditional main street that they have that is not this front street would be something, at least from the pictures, that would be close to Washington Boulevard. These roads here would be more like an I-15. These appear to be freeways. And so you have this kind of gridded area that's succinct and separate from all of the rest of the city, which is different than what we're talking about here in North Ogden, in that their main street, their form-based code piece, their main street is a block to the east of that major north-south or southwest to northeast front street with the train tracks. They cover a fair number of blocks. They look like they're quite a bit smaller blocks than what we typically have. That picture that you showed of Babe's Chicken House right there is right at the intersection of Main Street and Oak Street, which is Oak Street leads right to the new city hall that they're building. And so I see for me, there were some pretty stark differences because they didn't build a walkable neighborhood on a major road like 450, Washington or 2600. And it's a relatively small area. I do like the discussion that's evolving, that if we do something like this, that it be on a smaller area. I've talked to a lot of people that have reservations in their mind about whether they would want to be out walking along Washington. Even if we drop the speeds, it's going to drop to 45 here soon with UDOT as they do their 1 year, whatever it is they're going to do. But even if it dropped to 40, there's still a lot of traffic that goes up and down Washington. And as we toured, Rob, 3 years ago when we went down, was it Bountiful that we went to? Bountiful was one of them, West Valley City was one, and Sugar House was the other one. All of those were off of West Valley Cities was south of a main thoroughfare that's Washington-esque. Bountiful's was on the old Main Street, which is off of a main thoroughfare. Sugar House was the same way. It's tucked back away from the main thoroughfare. So all of those have certainly worked, and looking at Roanoke, Texas, it has certainly worked. I'd love to see all the different banks and spas and barbecues and Twisted Root Burger. Doesn't that sound good? Oh, I wonder what that place is like. But I just don't. I'm having a hard time envisioning this type of development along a busy thoroughfare. All the successes I've seen are where it's tucked off of a thoroughfare, and the thoroughfare gets you there, and then it turns in. I think of Tempe, Arizona. I don't know if you've been down there. They did a lot of this a couple of decades ago, making it much more walkable, but almost the north-south rural road there, the north-south, they dropped that down to 25 miles an hour through the area. UDOT's not going to do that out on Washington. So through the actual commercial area, they dropped that to 25 miles an hour, and all the side streets are 25 miles an hour, which makes it a college town as well. So you have 60,000 students there that make it very walkable. So I'm trying to. I like what form-based code does from a look standpoint. I'm trying to figure out still where it's going to apply in North Ogden and where it can be successful. It's going to be limited in my mind wherever we do it. I like the cannery area because we already have the cannery with that kind of fronting. But how far down? I mean, all the way to 1700, is that too big of an area? Are we thinking maybe the cannery and a little bit to the south of it when that redevelops, and back off of the cannery on 2300, where 2300 becomes the walkable street? I don't know. But those are my concerns that I had as I looked through the information that you'd given us.
Were you wanting a response to those
Nope,
thoughts?
just wanted to express my thoughts and concerns. You can add if you'd like to, though. It wasn't a question, but you can rebut or whatever you'd like.
Well, I mean, I guess I'd leave it to you. If you would like a response, I'm happy to give it. I don't have a need for my own sake to give it. I want to make sure that I'm not pushing an agenda one way or another.
If you think I'm missing something, I want to know.
What I would say is that I think that you've identified a really important point about the quality of the thoroughfare and whether it's pedestrian oriented. One of the points that I've made in the past is that if you're going to pass the form-based code, and certainly as it's currently been designed, that you need to, I would strongly recommend that you not pass the form-based code and not adopt a complete streets policy along Washington Boulevard. That's point number one. Point number two would be, because it's the entire development pattern that you need in order to get success, and part of that is that one of the most central ingredients in that, and maybe the most central ingredient, is the thoroughfare that it's built around. So we would definitely, there's definitely an overlap in our point of view with regards to needing a walkable urban thoroughfare for it to be centered around. The question is, to me, whether Washington does or can or cannot become that. There have been, this was one example with Roanoke, Texas, and there are a lot of things that are different about it than North Ogden. And there have been, this is a conservative number, but at the same time, there have been over 400 form-based codes that have been passed in the last 15 or so years. It's probably actually closer to 600 or 700 at this point in time. And form-based code is not something that is applicable to only one scale of a city, like a small town or New York City. But what is important to notice is that it has to be what's called calibrated. So you shrink it or you expand it, so to speak, in terms of the number of stories that you allow and things like that, while they all follow the same principles. So a local example of where a larger thoroughfare is conceivable for pedestrians is Washington Boulevard, as you are just 5 or 6 miles away down in Ogden. There's the buildings are right next to the street, and there's a number of things that are done in order to lessen the effective width of the thoroughfare, including one of the main things is mid-block crossings for pedestrians, which slows the cars down, as well as medians that make it essentially half the distance for a pedestrian to get from one side of the street to a safe area. I believe there's even some benches in those medians in some areas in Washington. I could be mistaken about that. In in Ogden City. And so as currently constituted, you're absolutely correct that Washington is not in its present state of a high quality public realm that's good for walking. I sort of picked up working on this project after the consultant that we hired had done their work, and took the template and refined it, and the understanding that I was given was that it was centered around Washington. That could certainly be taken away. But on the other hand, there's also some downsides to moving it away from Washington. Supposing that you were to slow down and engage in significant major traffic calming activities on Washington, the amount of traffic can be a good thing because it provides steady flow of potential customers for businesses with high degree of visibility, and every car that drives by the community that would develop would have the opportunity to advertise not only for each individual business but for that walkable area as a whole. And so if it's kind of like, when you get a backwater pond when you have a low flow of water, right? And so the more you have going through, the more traffic you have going through at reasonable speeds because of traffic calming measures, the more potential customers and customer base you have in order to contribute to the success of that development. So I definitely see your concern. I think that the issue is, the way I see it is, do you want to do something with Washington? If the answer to that is no, then it's kind of maybe a decision tree. It could be a decision tree of, okay, well then do we shelf the form-based code and put it on the shelf and walk away from it? Or do we look at doing it in another area where there's not a thoroughfare that's as developed, and we don't want to mess with Washington and the way it works? But for the sake of, frankly, my professional credibility, I've tried to be very clear that the character of Washington would need to change in order to help contribute to the success of a form-based code. I think that.
Well, and you have been very clear about that, and you've done excellent work. You've got a lot of hours into this, and your presentations and the information that you've given to help us make these kinds of decisions has just been top notch. So I want to compliment you on that. You've done great work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Are there other questions that the council has for me? I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So Brandon, when you look at like the connected, John, can you pull up the connected street network? Maybe you can clarify for me. Is the purple like where it's recommended that we have more form-based?
No, not exactly. I mean, it is part of the form-based, but these different colors, the purple, the orange, and then the pink, are all different sub-districts based on that would be part of the form-based code if this map were adopted. Now, that's a big if, right? No one's saying that this is the map that has to be adopted. This is the based on the project scope that I was given. I refined some work that was given to me from the consultant, and it was to focus on, from our general plan, the areas that were known as Southtown, which is this area here, and Downtown, which is this area here. So Downtown was more the northern area of Washington Boulevard, centered around 2600 North, and then Southtown was more centered around the cannery. So I think, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. I think my first off, when I was on the planning commission, we started talking about the form-based code. I liked its simplicity for developers. We talked about if you wanted this kind of a building, you just open up to that page. This is what's going to be allowed, and so it had a lot of clarity. I think for me at least, it seems to me when you show those three different areas, the South Town, the main town, et cetera, I think a walkable district could work in North Ogden. I just think it's certain areas that would have to be chosen to become. And I think you were referring to, the Megaplex area. Megaplex is incredibly successful. It's off Washington. They have a lot of, anchor kinds of businesses that demand that, almost demand that walkable. So I really like the form-based code. I just wonder if maybe we could, maybe as part of the general plan, maybe designate areas where we would say, okay, this is going to be an area that's designated more walkable. Therefore, all of the buildings have to be of this stature. This area is probably going to be more of an office complex area. Therefore, it's going to have this kind of a form-based code. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that the way, the simplest way to make that decision would be to decide if you'd like to adopt the form-based code, where you'd like to adopt it, because the rules in the form-based code are already set out about what building types are allowed in what subdistricts, and so those building types define the character of those subdistricts. The question would be, do we want this to be a walkable area or not? If you start to change the zones at this point and what they allow a whole bunch, then it's going to be a lot more work, is the short way of putting it. So the question is, it's kind of an on-off switch, is, if you think that the walkable communities that form-based code produces is what you want in a given area, then those are the areas that you would want to look at adopting it. And then if there's another type of development that you want to look at, that would probably have to be another project.
Sid, I guess that's what I'm looking for maybe you to do, is to say that, okay, this would be the downtown neighborhood, this would be the downtown market, this is the south, and we could see this kind of form-based code existing well here.
If I understand,
see something different in this area of the general plan.
If I understand you correctly, that's what this map is doing.
Right. That's that's what I'm looking for is.
So for each of these, for the purple area,
there's
3 or 4 building types that are allowed. So the purple represents a general character of the type of neighborhood, right? And then it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of the right metaphor, but it's like development for dummies, so to speak, right? You look at the color, you take that color, you go to the sub-district, and it says, okay, in this sub-district, you are allowed to build these 3 or 4 different types of building types. And then the developer says, okay, I want to look at these building types, and I choose, building type B, and I want to build this one, right? And it's designed so that the rules are intended to be designed so that they're compatible with a different type of building that the developer next to him wants to develop, and have them still be mixed on the same block and in the same area. So the purple is the most compact. Dense is probably the easiest term to use to help you understand it. And then the orange is the least compact, and this is sort of a specialized, almost more commercial specialty zone with some design guidelines is kind of one way of summarizing it. So
the majority of the purple would be storefront buildings, general stoop buildings, and terrace buildings.
Yes, that's correct. And there's behind the America First is a good example of. There's some what would qualify as terrace buildings there in Ogden. There's also some storefront buildings, and I forgot the other building type, but I think that there's a similar building type there. In the American Can building, or currently houses the Da Vinci Academy, I think.
Well, I'm like Phil, Brandon. I've watched you. In fact, I've commented several occasions. I don't know if I've seen anybody with more passion than you on this subject. So that has just been remarkable, and I'm grateful to be able to see that. I'm not sure if I have any direction. I think that was really helpful for me to see a little bit more clarity in it.
What about 2550 west of Washington as that develops? We have all that potential commercial on the north side there that could stretch almost all the way down to the elementary school there.
That's the pink is.
Yeah, the pink that's up there.
Yeah, and one clarification, I think I missed this in the summary. What the Planning Commission was, I know they specifically stated that where it was showing pink on the map, that they wanted to do I think they were intrigued by the idea of 2300 north to 1700 north. That's a pretty close to the walkable pedestrian shed that we'd be looking at. It's a reasonable area. It would produce what's essentially called a corridor code, where it becomes this main walkable thoroughfare. Again, you'd need to do some significant work on Washington Boulevard at making it pedestrian friendly, but you wouldn't be competing with some of our newer high target development that's come in from 2300 to 2600. But the one addition that they stated that they were interested in was that pink area and adopting the form-based code there, because it's a vacant field at present, and they think that there's the opportunity for a shopping center to go in there, and that's why that particular zone was placed in that area. That was based on their feedback. And so they had, if I'm understanding you correctly, the Planning Commission had similar sentiments on regarding that property.
You already pulled it up, John. Can you zoom out just a little bit, John? I mean, and scroll east just a little bit. See, I'm looking at that area and imagining that behind Walgreens there, we've got the pool on the south side. We have the Montessori school. We have Smith's, eventually an Arby's, a Starbucks, a McDonald's, Lee's, Bicentennial Park, the shops and restaurants that are along the strip mall there north of Ace, all of that area. That as I've looked at it, it seems to feel like an area where we would more easily create a walkable area. Speeds on 2550 are already relatively slow, and because we control that street, we wouldn't have to fight with UDOT. Rob's nodding his head. I mean, UDOT, UDOT is UDOT. They do what they do. But 2550, I'm imagining, a family being able to go to North Shore and decide to go across the street and get something to eat, and you've got the calming devices that are on 2550 there to encourage that slow type, maybe some on-street parking. I don't know how that would work there, but...
Disaster.
What's that? Disaster?
Disaster.
Okay, no on-street parking then, Councilwoman. But I'm just trying to think of where we could have that kind of off-street that enables us to have that nice walkable area where people can go, and you can get everything from Subway to a burger and go do some banking and go to the pool and swim for a little while and walk over and get some Little Caesars pizza and feed the kids, whatever it happens to be. That seems to be the natural area for me, but that's just my thinking.
On that note, I see the cannery and also the King's Plaza is being developed into that walkable area. And like you say, heading south where it's not developed.
Yeah.
And I also agree that if you're going to do that, then some definitely street consideration needs to be put in to make Washington safe for that area. And I don't know, I don't know how well mediums would work, in between, and the flashing lights like they have in Ogden. I don't know how that'd work, but it seems to be a pretty good fit for there.
Okay.
But definitely street safety and along Washington would definitely have to be. But I do like the flavor that is going on with the cannery right through there, and I think it could go into the King's Plaza.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I do think that there can be patches of it, not the whole Washington Boulevard is form base.
If I understood you correctly, you were referring to the cannery area and then to the southern extents of the city. Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. I mean, the initial staff suggestion was take it to 2,300. Is that approximately where you would think as well, or less than that?
No, I think especially right through there, especially where we're going to do that high density.
Okay.
That's to the south of it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've already got Kurt's there, you've got Pizza Pie, you've got that whole intersection, the middle part, that too. the whole middle part that you could do something with and make it, you know, families could gather there. I mean, at one time we even talked about putting a fountain or something in there.
Well, and there's all that undeveloped, that farm that's right across from where Village at Prominence Point will be going in, that will, I imagine that will eventually, and perhaps even those townhome apartment condo thingies, whatever they are on the northwest corner of 17 and Washington, those perhaps coming down as the land becomes more valuable for other uses. Yeah, like a patchwork.
Are there other questions that you have for me?
I got a comment that's completely throw you off.
Okay.
I think it could work for the whole thing. I'm thinking I'm 53 years old. I grew up out here in North Ogden. I remember when the Barker gas station was up here and the speed limit down Washington wasn't 50 miles an hour. I think it could get changed if we build a form-based code. And we're already talking about, you talked about adopting a
complete streets
street thing. And you know, UDOT can be difficult, but they can be worked with.
How did
Done
Washington
it in my
make
professional.
it?
What's that?
I said, how did Washington Boulevard? Isn't that state-owned?
Yes, and UDOT, like I said, UDOT is able to be worked with. I mean, we were already talking, we'd have to put in some more cross streets and stuff like that. I think 20, 30 years out from now, I think it could work. Do I think it will work in 5 years? No, I think that's where we have to build it in sections, but I think we need to have a code of sorts. That's, you know, my thought process is I'm not opposed to considering the whole thing. Maybe we piecemeal it first, but I could see it working. Obviously, Washington would have to slow down. We'd have to have medians. How long did it take them to get medians in downtown Ogden? Again, I grew up. I used to never have medians in downtown Ogden. They used to always have the cross streets and pedestrian crossing. My mom used to think it said Presbyterian, and she couldn't understand why Mormons couldn't cross the street. But that was anyway. But then you look at Logan. Logan has a similar. You wear the Blue Bell Diner, whatever it is. That whole side's a walkable side. Across from where the Tabernacle. I mean, that street's awful busy. So I can see it working. I think we just need to do it right. And so yes, I think we start sections and work our way through there. I like the form-based code. I like the idea of it. I like it for developers. I like it. I like the way it makes it makes the city seem more homey. 21st South and Salt Lake, if you head east of State Street, that's a busy street. And then as you get up there, it actually narrows down, and it forces you to become a walkable neighborhood. When I was working and doing a job down there, personally, I hated going there for lunch, not because they didn't have 1,000 different places, but the parking sucked because it was a walkable area. And that's a busy street if you've driven that, and so I could see it working, but I don't see it working again like in 5 years. And I know as a council, some of us are short timers, but I think I like the form-based code, and I think it could work. There's just got to be a lot of things that need to happen. So Brandon, I say, my advice would say, let's keep looking at it, but maybe we develop, let's say, these are the pockets we want to start with. And keep in mind, if another developer comes in to develop an area of farmland that is now being sold and stuff, that we talk to them about it. And this is kind of what we're thinking as a city before they start throwing up weird stuff, or something, I just think I think it could work. So.
A couple of technical points addressing issues that you brought up. UDOT's required, if a policy is passed regarding streets, that they have to respond to that. So, but the catch there is that the city has to pass the policy first, right? So they can't. They're not bound to respond to wish list that's not formally adopted. But if there's an actual policy document that's adopted, then even though they have jurisdiction, they're required to respond to that if a city expresses its will and formally adopts it in a policy document. And so that would be there would be some, I don't know if leverage is the right term, but it's the only one that comes to mind, that would come with adopting.
What do you think? What would be the wording of the policy? I mean, like what do you mean?
It would just I mean, there would be diagrams of the types of cross sections that the city's interested in looking at, and it would say things like that they would like complete streets, to be developed along Washington Boulevard, and it would specify, details of what those streets should look like. But also the general point that they want a multimodal street that allows a mix of transportation options, not just, to be optimized solely for the automobile. It's not about getting rid of the automobile. I know, that's not a policy goal that's really reasonable. It's about balancing it with the viability, allowing other options to be viable, and slowing the automobile down, taming it, so to speak, so that it doesn't harm other uses and the ability to enjoy the environment around you for people who aren't in an automobile. That was the one technical point, and I can't seem to remember the other, but it's an important point because it's kind of a mix between the idea that's been expressed that UDOT's fully in charge, and they can be worked with. They can actually work with, but you have to adopt a policy document for it to have some teeth. And
so when you say policy document,
the complete streets document,
not a form-based code document, the streets. And so how would we go about? Because we even looked at developing that policy?
We have a draft copy of a complete streets document. Staff hasn't gotten to presenting it because we're working on the form-based code, but it does exist, and I'd be happy to provide a copy to the council and anyone else who's interested of that document in its current state.
So with this document, if I understand it correctly, the document addresses cross streets, signals, pedestrian routes, and everything. It's so that we present that to UDOT, and then UDOT would have to make a statement saying yay or nay, or we're willing to work with this over these few years or whatever. So, I mean, it's so like the concern that the resident had, Mr. Shaw had about the light at 2300. That would be something that could be in the document.
Currently cross streets are not addressed, and because it's general to the city. I believe that Washington Boulevard it has specific cross sections for specific streets, but it addresses complete streets, on the topic and the scale of the entire city. And it doesn't address, there was one other thing it doesn't address. It shows the basic cross section that the city is interested in, which, would help address the travel speed for automobiles.
So Brandon, could we give you, again, 9.8B says consider direction on form-based code. Have we given you, would it be good to take maybe some bullet points or 5 things that would be good to have you take back?
Well, let me
present, or how can we help you best?
I'm going to make a statement. You can tell me if it's true or false, I guess. Okay. The appetite of the council, as I understand it, is that where everybody's on board, and maybe that's too strong of a term, so you change my words if that's inaccurate, is from 1700 north to 2300 north. Is that accurate, or is it a smaller area, or is that inaccurate?
Okay, so when you say 1700 to 2300, are you talking about
along Washington? But
that being the only section of Washington that's devoted to the form-based code?
Yes, but it's a pretty large section still.
Okay. And therefore, we wouldn't have form-based code like around 2600, and we wouldn't have a walkable area around 2600, or we would still look at 2600 as a walkable area. As
what I was saying is that, if based on my understanding of the idea of phasing and where there's consensus, is that I believe that there's consensus approximately from the area to 1700 to 2300 north. I don't understand there to be consensus outside of that, and therefore I'd put it in either don't do it there or lower priority. One of the reasons why staff recommended has looked at saying let's leave this alone from 2300 to say 2800 is because we're already going to be widening the thoroughfare there quite dramatically. And just to be really blunt, auto-oriented development and walkable development are, when they're not balanced correctly, they're like oil and water. And so, I've been trying to be very clear about what needs to be done to successfully achieve a walkable community if that's the policy direction that you decide you want to go in. And because of that, we think that a better focus area is, south of 2300, because you've already got a lot of new development in 2300 and north, including the new Smiths, a lot of businesses that have gone into the strip mall to the north of Smiths and other businesses. And so we're kind of looking at, I guess, the low-hanging fruit is maybe the 2300 south to 1700. If you're interested in committing to changing the thoroughfare along Washington. But again, you need to do what it takes to bring the speeds down. And what I would say, going back to the complete streets documents, like, speed limits are great, but what really controls speeds isn't speed limits, it's design speed. Design speed is determined by the width and shape of the street and the elements that are present on it, including medians, on-street parking, width of travel lanes, street trees, street furniture, things like that. If you want a form-based code area to be successful, then you need to commit to it with seriousness so that you can achieve the necessary elements to make it successful. And so, the more focus we can put on, if you want to pursue that area for a form-based code, doing what we can to make the streetscape and the cross sections amenable to it, that would be my suggestion. But feel free to speak up and tell me if I'm missing something, if that's not a consensus from 1700 to 2300.
Well, I'm looking at the aerial map here again, and looking at 2300, going south, we've got Zions Bank on one side. We have a small empty parcel south of Zions Bank. So Zions Bank isn't going to change. Oh, you're there. So we have Zions Bank. We have that small parcel south of Zions Bank. If you go to the other side, we already have businesses that are built there that I doubt are going to go anywhere. Buildings there. We have Dr. Mackley's dental practice. We have box self-storage there. And then a small piece there on the south side of 2175. There's a corner house, but then you have Lindquist Mortuaries, you have RW Custom Homes, and Best Realty there. And then we get to that block at 2100 where Bullfrog, 2000, where Bullfrog Spas is. That parcel just to the north of Bullfrog Spas, John, isn't that going in with some townhomes?
Yep.
So those homes have been taken down because there's townhomes going in there, which leaves just that remaining small parcel to the north there. I'm thinking if we were to do it on the south end, it makes sense in my brain, which doesn't say a lot. From 2000 south to 1700, where we have the cannery. Mm-hmm. We have Kurt's, we have the old King's Plaza. We have some older businesses that are there by the car wash and all of Flutter, and then we have all of that new development that'll be going in down towards 1700 Country Boy Drive. And down to the city border. What happens with your uncle's property there, the Severing property on that southwest corner. That's a pretty prime area for commercial development or housing or something along those lines. And that's in our annexation map. Is that correct, John?
Yes.
How far does our annexation map go south down to 1500? Just below the animal hospital?
Yeah. So the where it says Premier Choice Auto,
right?
That's where the townhomes that are in Harrisville are. So it'd be north of that, but across the street it would be everything kind of above this Ogden Power Sports wording is.
So, if I could add one technical point, if you could center in on the Cannery Center, John. One of the reasons why we propose going north, and this isn't to dispute your suggestion.
I'm happy to hear your ideas.
is because we anticipate that were a form-based code to be adopted, that the Cannery Center would be the central node of it, and then Kurt's across the street. And in order to help make that successful, you want some additional development to the north of it to help build to that crescendo, so that it's actually the center of the node rather than the edge of that downtown node. That would help make it successful. That it would be sort of the anchor of the area, and you'd need something to the north in order to make it so that there's a critical mass in order to be successful. How far north? I don't know. Maybe it's not 2300. Maybe it's more to 2100 or 2175 north. And with the recognition that it would take time for some of those to redevelop. Sure. Oh, and one other thing that came up earlier. My strong suggestion would be that if you're going to adopt a form-based code, that any area that you adopted along Washington or any major thoroughfare, that you adopt it on both sides of the street. If you don't adopt it on both sides of the street, then one of the things that pedestrians really like and that makes them feel comfortable is having what's called a street wall, or having an outdoor room. And when you have buildings on both sides of the street that are similar height and scale, that outdoor room is created. It creates a sense of peace, safety, and people feel comfortable. They feel able to relax and be themselves, and to they have a limit to the amount of area and space they have to take in. If you only do one side of the street, it feels it feels a lot more open, and there's not this sense of concentrated space where they feel like they're in an outdoor living room and they can relax and they can engage in some outdoor dining and stuff like that. Those possibilities tend to not be something that people they tend to enjoy their environment a lot less, and it becomes less, it doesn't achieve the same effect of being walkable. It may sound like a small detail, I haven't brought it up before, but it's actually incredibly important. It's just so in the background of things that I haven't thought to mention it before.
It's not balanced.
Yeah, exactly.
So Brandon, real quick, I guess I'll just put this out. It seems to me like maybe we're getting the cart a little bit before the horse, in the sense that if we're going to adopt a form-based code, and you'd mentioned you need to adopt a complete streets document. My opinion is we need to have a complete streets document to us so that we can do it either in unison, or even go to UDOT now and here's our complete streets document so that we can adopt the form-based code no matter where we put it on Washington. Because if that's going to help us and UDOT understand what we want to do with Washington, that helps influence how a form-based code. That's kind of my thought, that we need to have that complete streets document now. I don't know how anybody else feels, but that's kind of my thought. So I'd like to see it.
Okay, I'm happy to forward you a copy of it in its current draft. I haven't done much work on it. It's something that came from our consultant, but I'm happy to share it with you.
Yeah, that'd be nice. For me, one of the hard things is my crystal ball doesn't focus very well, and trying to guess what are we going to be like 30 years down the road from now. How busy is Washington going to be? How what are we going to be? Something more, just naturally evolve into something more than a dead end. I mean, you come to North Ogden, unless you're going over the pass, you're either turning left to head west, or you're coming east and turning south, unless you live up here. We're not like Sugar House and Sandy and some of these others where we're passed through and you've got traffic coming and going from multiple directions. As development comes, that could change. Right, and it's hard to know. What's the best route for us to take. We don't want to overcommit, and then, we, as some of our local great retailer experienced people have said, that we drive business away because we become too onerous with our expectations. But at the same time, we don't want to leave ourselves so open that we end up with a mishmash of stuff, and we really don't have an identity, and we look 30 years from now, as I'm eyeing my plot up there at the cemetery, and wondering why didn't we do something back then. So that's kind of the conundrum that I'm playing with in my mind.
You're not going to be on council in 30 years?
Oh. I probably won't even recognize myself in 30 years.
Well, and Phil does bring up a good point. If you had told me in 1984, when I graduated from Weber High, that there would be a McDonald's in North Ogden,
Yeah.
I would have told you were absolutely crazy. Now we have McDonald's and Wendy's and
And
so
a 2700.
yeah, I mean, I left and on my mission, and there was no grocery stores except for Ken's Market. Come back to a Smith's. So in 30 years, there's going to be probably a city council will be sitting here saying, "Yeah, those guys thought some good things back in 2019, but municipalities have changed a lot. We don't have an Ogden City Mall anymore because everybody now wanted to go storefront,
Let's move
Right.
it.
and then nobody wants storefront because malls are kind of cool."
Eat it dead
You had
enough.
Macy's right behind Kurt's.
Oh, but Macy's wasn't up and functioning.
When you went to high school?
It was for a period of time, and then it sat for how many years?
Romance Week is dead
Are there additional questions that you have for me? I don't know if there's comments.
We're just reminiscing.
Yeah, we're
Brandon.
just
I think
reminiscing.
good. We could do public
Sorry,
comments
Brandon.
now.
No, I just want to make sure that if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer. And I don't know if you want to continue the discussion amongst yourselves, or if there's comments from the public you want to entertain.
I think if the mayor's okay, I think we ought to maybe move to public comments.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to, I think we
Sorry,
dialogued
Cheryl.
back and forth and so forth here, so we would entertain public comments at this time regarding this particular subject.
You be nice.
Randy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. I think this has been a wonderful presentation that Brandon's put on, and it's opened up a wonderful discussion, I think, and I'm gratified to see that happen. I think as we look at a bigger metropolis, we are the bedroom community of Ogden. People don't distinguish when our border starts and when, to look at the concentration of that purple area, I don't think our citizens want that level of. We are the suburban. In other words, don't try to form all of the balance just within our city. We balance North Ogden, and North Ogden can keep building out this way and do some of this stuff if they want. But I don't think we as public want that level of concentration all that way. Now, the things, the good things that I think have come out of this discussion is you take that Roanoke example, and I think Phil was hit and Blake were hitting on it. That if we that's a wonderful kind. I like form base in the right place, but I don't think anywhere on Washington Boulevard is the place for it. That is such a commuter artery, and calming traffic down through there. People don't want to slow down to 25 miles an hour coming through there and be pinched off and calmed. They're trying to get home. But the idea of taking that pink area and putting in a Roanoke, where you've got that, where you can have walkable street, and going along 2700 there, don't put it up to 27. Have people drive in, park, and then walk that area and get not only some barbecue places, but some nice restaurants and things to come in there. And that's a place that the wife and I could go down and enjoy an evening, like was pointed out. So, and Cheryl pointed out the area further up. But what we need to do, I think, is have an L. In other words, take the traffic off of 2600, drive in there, park, and then have an area up there where you were mentioning that could be another pocket of form-based code where people would enjoy. Well, people very much enjoy these things, but not if it constricts their access to home and causes a restriction on our main road. So I think some good things have been talked about here tonight. And so I would just, number one, adopt that you don't touch Washington Boulevard, and also to leave some balance in the kind of businesses that come, so you don't make it so you have to be something that fits in a building like that. So if we had these things off, 1, 2, or 3 even, but mainly I'd start right with that pink area and take Brandon's dream and have it happen right there, and then we can see what we've done. We haven't affected our traffic flows or anything. We've made a wonderful little area, and it's actually right close to our main crossroads, but it's not restricting any of them. And so, you know, we could have a wonderful little place there full of restaurants and shops and things, and still have our tire shops and our practical things that we need on down our boulevard. See, Ogden hasn't restricted. They've got their section, but they haven't used their whole town for that kind of a building. And anyway, I'm encouraged by your discussion tonight, and hope that we can further consider this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
My name is Ryan Forsyth. I'm a real estate developer.
Address?
I live in Layton, Utah. We just did the Beans and Brews here. We're working on 300 West, the new road. Hope to get started this next week. The O'Reilly's Auto, and we did AutoZone and helped with the Smith's Marketplace. And currently are working on the pink area. Have been doing so for the last 3 years. Have looked really, we've been partnered with the Barkers on that property, trying to find a good fit for that. And as I've seen and heard all these comments, I thought it might be helpful to hear a developer's standpoint and the complexities of, or realities of how this affects the timeline and how things would happen. First of all, I really like what everybody's been saying as well. But one common thread that I've found is this works really good in redevelopment areas. We're talking about the Cannery, we're talking about the Bluebird, we're talking about Logan City. I come from a family of merchants. My dad started a Christensen's department store on Brigham City, Utah in the 80s, the end of the walkable period, and when everybody went to the malls. And I think a lot of these places are coming back. Sugar House, my wife has been very involved in the redevelopment of Sugar House. All of these places, though, where this really fits is in a place that was developed in the teens and the 20s and has had restrictions, 24th Street in Ogden, and has had restrictions on and needed an invigorating component to help these areas that were already walkable. That's one of the thoughts that I have. Another thing, a lot of the comments about millennials, I think a lot of those places they become this multifaceted development, not because millennials want it, but because that's where the jobs are. I think that when you're downtown Salt Lake and walkability isn't just that you can walk in between streets, but there's access to public transportation. There's tracks, there's Front Runner, there's all these different things. That's a big difference I see with Farmington Station. I'm currently the government relations chair for International Council of Shopping Centers. We focus on large shopping centers, and I don't think Farmington Station is doing as well as everybody says it is. Banana Republic just went out. Gap just went out. They got to the end of their first period, and they're not making it work. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's not got the population to support it. And even then, it has much more accessibility to public transportation via Front Runner than North Ogden does. In addition to that, I really like the idea of diverse housing. I like the idea of form-based code. I like the idea as a developer to be able to come in and say, this is what I can do here. This is what my density is. But on the other side, it becomes so complicated. And to a developer, time is money. If I could tell you how many times, we just barely got done permitting a job in Las Vegas. We spent, we got a change order from our engineer for $119,000 on a $1 million project because the city pushed so many, and I mean, we spent $50,000 designing a block wall with the depiction of the endangered desert tortoise that will cost us $10,000 to build, you know? And sometimes the problem comes from this desire to push all this design and then the time that it takes to implement it, the time and the money that it takes to design it. So I like form-based code because what Mr. Severing said, its base is to make it more simple, to know what we can do, to go find the right users that can make it work. But I think that more so than that, reality is that right now, online shopping is killing retail. The type of retail that you're talking about is the type of retail you're talking about by creating these small walkable areas are mom pop shops. They're, you know, Twisted Root Burger Shop, and they're these places that for the most part, 25-30%, I don't have an exact number, but you got to have a lot of money to try to make those work. And if you're a developer and I go to a bank and say, hey, I've got this great idea, Joe that lives up the street from me wants to have a burger shop, and I want to build a building that the city has said needs to look like the Taj Mahal or like Park City, and it's going to cost me $1 million, and Joe will sign a 1-year lease with me and he's willing to put up, you know, everything he's got. Me as a developer, I'm not going to get very far with a bank and financing. And so a lot of what drives this is the economic driver. It's, you know, I don't think that we should try to rethink what people have proven for 100 years. And granted, there's cycles. Things are going to change. But sometimes if we try to push 30 years on our property today, what we think 30 years from now is going to be the best, we're just going to waste the next 30 years. And it's going to make it very difficult to serve our citizens how they are today and serve, you know, I was with Perry City yesterday or a couple days ago. We were talking about a development that they own and wanted to do, and they hate the idea of storage. Okay, they hate the idea of mobile home park. They hate the idea of all these things. But we just finished a Dollar Tree store in Washington, Utah in January. And some astute developers bought the property right off of Interstate 15 30 years ago and said, this is going to be something someday. But they put storage units and trailer parks on it. Now it's the Kohl's and the Down East, and you know, he said it came 15 years sooner than we thought, but luckily for us, we did what was able to pay and provide us a return today, and wasn't extremely difficult for us to redevelop in the future. It wasn't that you had 5-story office buildings and things like that. But I think I loved what this gentleman said too. We need to look at this as what it really is, that North Ogden is essentially a bedroom community to Ogden. It's not just saying, hey, we want this little piece of North Ogden to fit all these things. Sometimes it's a better idea to see how it fits in the grand scheme of things, like Sugar House. You can hop on a tracks at Sugar House and take it down to Front Runner and come up to Farmington Station and get around from there. It's just got all the accessibility you need. A comment was made about the developer being interested about the short term. I can tell you that's true sometimes. There's a lot of projects that we as a company do that we hope to turn and make a profit and feed our families and get to the next one. But for the Barkers on their piece of, you know, property here, they've been working on this for a generation, 2 generations. And it's hard to be selling something and attracting these tenants and people. Like right now, we're weeks away from submitting multiple restaurant opportunities on 2600 North that form-based code would not allow for drive-through. I think that it's not typical fast food restaurants, but it's good sit-down restaurants with a drive-through component that can make it work in this demographic. The economic driver is that's the tenant, the best tenant that will pay the most rent, that will have the most staying power, that will provide a fixture for other development to come around. You know, it takes getting those big pieces, up front. But on the other hand, that also makes it difficult to plan for the future if we don't know which way we're going. Some of the roadway issues, I think of places that work with this complete streets theory. Most of them are redevelopment. Moab works wonderfully. It's a destination. People are there too. And it's a busy street. It is a busy street, but it's a destination where people are coming to spend days at a time. I don't know if that's the same here. Now, on the other hand, Richfield, Utah did the same thing. They put planter boxes and they did all these things, and it's a snowplow nightmare. It looks horrible. It slows down everything. The reality of it just doesn't work. I'm not saying it does here. It doesn't. I'm just saying these are things that I would think about as you're planning the future of your city. But I do think it's important to remember that things change and things evolve. And currently we're working on a project on 1700 in Washington as well. We've been working on it for a couple of weeks. I've spoken to Mr. Call about it. I think that's a great spot for it. I think that it is, but I do think that we have to be realistic in the size and the scope and what's surrounding it. And again, all these walkable areas, and it's mainly driven by business and employment and all these things. And I think if I were going to create those things, I would try very hard as a city to go after and to make it appealing for those type of employers and those type of people, so that you had the population base that those type of tenants want to come in and build a store or create an office building, and that a developer can afford to finance and make something happen. But I think that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments and suggestions.
Dennis Farr, 4275 North, 500 West in Pleasant View. I'm the in-law of the Barkers, who's the head guy working with Ryan to have this area that you're looking at in the pink there off of 2700 in Washington get developed. And as Ryan suggested, after 17 years of my efforts, I raised my family where the Walgreens is now. So I've been involved in this project for 17 years. We're now weeks away from submitting application for anywhere from 3 to 8 commercial entities to go onto that pink property, most of which don't fit some of the title restrictions of form-based, which are entities that generate tax revenue for the city of North Ogden. And so the timing of it all is a concern for this family, because we've dealt with working with UDOT. Ryan's now the 5th developer, multiple city councils, multiple planning, multiple mayors to try to finally get something instigated. As he said, they're cutting ground here this week on the road and on the O'Reillys that's already there that doesn't fit the tightest restrictions of form base, and so we knew this was coming. I actually have really appreciated the depth of discussion, not only with Brennan, who presented, but with each of you as council members, because there are some very serious and conscientious things that have to be weighed out. And I've appreciated the depth of discussion that's gone on that has made me feel a little better about the concerns I have as a landowner and citizen in the city, because there have been times I haven't felt that way. I felt like no one cared what the actual landowner was trying to have happen, not only in the interest of their family and their financial circumstances, but in the future of the city. We're well aware that that's the city center. We're well aware that there's two extremely busy roads on each side of it. We're also aware that decision made 40-something years ago put a tenant on that property in control of how long they hold that for yet another 10 years, which restricts some of what can happen there on the pink area that you're talking about as well. But I think for me, the most important consideration is for me to share my gratitude that you're not just rubber stamping something. Mr. Swanson, I especially appreciate the questions and the concerns that you pointed out in terms of where and how these types of things need to be implemented in relationship to traffic. There's been every single one of you point out of things that are benefits and concerns, and how do we work through that. I really appreciate, Brendan, your openness to look at, oh, maybe we should narrow this down, and maybe there's a place that we already kind of have some things in place that between the open space and the potential for redevelopment, this could work there. So my main desire tonight is to express a gratitude and appreciation for a group of people who care enough to really ask the hard questions and to consider them. Secondly, to express the concerns and the needs of a family who owns a piece right in the heart of town, who have been working for now 2 decades to get something happen, and we're literally weeks away from having some of that come to fruition. The application will probably be made before this is passed anyway, but it helps you have some added information to know where to from here. And then lastly, I want to express my appreciation to those who've come. We've had a good representation here tonight, and there's rarely do we have hardly anybody show up to these things. We've got a developer here. We've got someone here who's heading the Planning Commission who can present some real serious research and searching to try to present you with the best information they can, and then each of you, rather than just saying, well, his research is good enough, you've done some additional homework on your own, which restores a little bit of my confidence in City Hall, because I've had a window for a fairly long window that I didn't have much. So I just expressed that today to you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. As we move along in this meeting, we need to keep our comments within about 5 minutes so that we can keep within the time limit we have. Thank you.
I will certainly keep mine short. I'm Julie Barker Farr, 4275 North, 500 West. As they talked about Wayne Barker on the corner in the gas station, that was my uncle. I grew up on Washington Boulevard where the old Pioneer home was and was torn down. Lived at Walgreens. Before it was Walgreens, lived on that lot. And I would say 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, when we made that decision about Walgreens and we moved, we had thought as a family, piece of cake. I love North Ogden. I love what you've done with North Ogden, the streetlights, the planters. To my mind, 10 years ago, I thought, who wouldn't want to come to this wonderful community? Who wouldn't want a business here? For 10 years, we've been working, trying to get businesses to come to North Ogden. People would tell me, what we really want is a Ross. Check that one off. Joann's, check that one off. Hobby Lobby, check that one off. Again and again, Chick-fil-A. No, that one's not coming. We tend to think it's so easy. We love it. Everybody else should love it too. And they look at it and say, you know what? You're kind of a dead-end community. Sorry, but that's what they have literally told me. So I would urge caution as we envision what we can do with property. I went to a meeting a number of years ago, and we sat around even with our property, and citizens said what they wanted. They wanted boutiques here. They wanted ice cream shops here. They wanted to park here. And it would be ideal if we could always have everything we want, but I'm urging some caution in restrictions that we place on things. It's not always as easy. I mean, we as a family, we're probably sitting on some very valuable property that you would have thought could have developed years ago. And just now, we're starting to see some inroads. And we know North Ogden would like that to be a commercial area. The family would. But appreciate your efforts. I appreciate you understanding the developer, or a landowner, and the problems that we face. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
I can be really fast.
Okay.
I promise, respectful of your time. Chris Forsyth, Brigham City, Utah. Ryan is my son, and I'm his partner. I'm very grateful and express appreciation to what I've learned and heard tonight. I thought the presentation was excellent. And I appreciate many things I've been reminded of and learned. Let me make it just a really quick point. As Ryan mentioned, as a developer, I want to make the point that we don't often get to choose, like Mrs. Farr said, who comes. I can do this in an example. It'll take 60 seconds. Las Vegas, Nevada. The county commissioner, Marilyn Kirkpatrick, loves her community. She's over the northern part of Vegas. They wanted development. We had some property. We said, well, this is what the demographic is. We can get an AutoZone. We can get a Dollar Tree. We can get some of these really good businesses. We want Cracker Barrel. We want that. And I understood her. They don't have that there. And we fought, and just what Mrs. Farr said, we took that flag, we died on our swords. But it came back. The reality is we don't choose. The economics choose. And until some client is willing to sign a lease and commit themselves to that property through a lease, a bank will not talk to you. You can't pay the landowner. You can't put in the road, you can't put in the storm drain. So those are the realities that we many times deal with, every time deal with. And we can steer, we can guide, we can have points that we make as a city about architectural features or codes that help steer it in a certain direction. But I just want to make that point strong and loud that the economics choose. Those clients choose. Why will you never see an AutoZone on the east side of Salt Lake? Because the demographic is whenever there's a certain amount of cars that are 7 years and older, that's where an AutoZone will go. You will not see it on the east side of Salt Lake because everybody drives a new car. But they're all over Magna and West Valley and everywhere else. Those, our income, the ethnicity, all this data is fed into huge, huge computers, and that's how they choose who goes where. A Tractor Supply, I just finished one. How do they choose a Tractor Supply? How many Ford pickups and registered quarter horses are in the area? Those are key components, so you're not going to see a Tractor Supply on the east side of Salt Lake. Those are the kinds of considerations that as you choose how to engineer your community, I would urge you to look at. So thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I appreciate all your help tonight.
Thank you for your comments.
Can I say one 5-second thing? Is that okay?
No.
I'll give you 5 seconds.
One last thing that I also wanted to tell this I spoke with Mr. Call as we're getting ready to pull a building permit, and due to you have traffic impact studies and people come in and do that analysis of how much a building permit should cost. North Ogden, due to the way that the roads are, and most of them are state roads and things, Mr. Call explained to me, the impact fees are so much higher than other places. There's already barriers to entry that are not related to, not related to this sort of thing. So I just added barriers make it hard. So that's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, we'll move on to the last part of that agenda item, discussion or action to consider direction on form-based code. Council.
I don't, Brandon, do you have anything? Do you have some direction or I mean, we've talked a lot about a lot of stuff. I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel like you got direction? I mean, obviously I want that, at least what you have on the Complete Streets document, and you know, you talked from 2,300 to 1,700. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that, but I'm not opposed to looking at that area. I mean, we're not making a decision. What do you guys all think? I mean,
before we get Brandon back up here, can we get Dave back up here on his input on roads and plowing and snow? I mean, that's going to affect you too.
It is, but I mean,
we don't have any snow, you don't have to plow.
Yeah. Well, and most of this won't affect us just because it is a UDOT situation. So, I mean, there are parts of it, 2550, in some of these side streets, depending on how we grid it, like you guys talked about doing different grids and those kind of things. And those are complicated to us. I mean, anytime you put an island anywhere, it's harder for us to push snow and do those kind of things. But, yeah, for the most part, this is along Washington Boulevard and 2700, which is all UDOT. So, anything else?
So no, thanks.
Okay, Council. As I see the discussion that evolved here this evening, we haven't defined any particular places where we feel like we can implement any of these particular things at this point in time. We got different discussions that's come from developers. We got discussions that's come from Brandon. Where is it we want to, if we do want to initiate form-based code, where is it? And do we have enough unity in the council at this point in time? And enough information to each of you so that you can make that kind of decision?
This would be one that I would love to just think about for another couple weeks. I would love to see something maybe designated. This is just me. I'm kind of a lineal thinker. I would like to see where maybe walkable areas could be generated. I loved what Cheryl said about the King's Plaza. I see that as being a very high potential walking area, businesses that would be there. So I kind of see different places in the city being walkable and other places of the city that are more conducive because of Washington. I don't think we're ever going to have the ability to slow down Washington. But maybe areas that would be more office complexes. It's going to come eventually. Eventually it'll come.
This has been good for me to be an observer, and I have the opportunity to work with Brandon and with John. And this is a very significant decision, and that's sort of an understatement. But you've got two or three things that are going on at the same time here. We're working very diligently on producing a streetscape policy for you. And we're going to be meeting with the Planning Commission relative to that at our next meeting, have some discussion about that. The streetscape is really a companion to what Brandon was talking about in terms of complete streets, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't wrap those two things together, or at least have them come along fairly rapidly to do that. The second thing is you don't have an official recommendation from the Planning Commission. So I don't know what Brandon's thinking is. We haven't really chatted about this, but the Planning Commission definitely should be appraised of your discussion this evening. this idea of maybe limiting the scope of it, certainly something that could be provided to them. Another thought that I have is maybe it's time for a joint work session with the Planning Commission, so both bodies can kind of come to a feel good about a direction. So 2 or 3 things that maybe will give you some food for thought.
Yeah, I can see some of the points that have been brought about by the council this evening when I start talking about the Kings Plaza and some of those areas down through there. But across the road, you got to have all those storage units you got to have that are in the road, so to speak. So I guess we got to have bare ground and a bare area to start from scratch. That's my point of view.
I suggest we table this and do a work session, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm more confused than I was before. It doesn't feel right now to make that kind of decision, and it doesn't take anything away from Brandon's, but we don't have a streetscape, and we don't have the planning commission's input, so how can we make a decision?
Well, I agree with Rob's statement that this is probably one of the largest decisions we've made in a long time as a council, with the potentially furthest reaching tentacles in how the city develops and what it looks like and where we go and what happens. So I really like the idea of having a joint work session that's dedicated just to this, no other items, just a work session with the Planning Commission where we can sit down and spend hours. Sorry, Cheryl.
Hours
but
is fine.
Hours talking and working through and discussing and trying to come to some kind of a consensus as a group.
Okay.
Sooner rather than later.
So it was, I don't really need to make a motion to table it until we meet with the Planning Commission?
We don't need a motion. The reason we had this discussion tonight is because there was some consideration that possibly it wasn't the direction the council wanted to go, and so we didn't want to schedule the extra meetings, to have the discussion, just have it ultimately fail. But it sounds like we're at least considering applying it somewhere in the city, so it's worth having those meetings. One thing of note is the temporary land use regulation we passed in relation to this was done in December, which means it expires in May, right at the beginning of May. So if there's not something else in place in May, then it expires, and the ordinance would, if there's nothing in place by that time, then it reverts back to the original zoning.
We got to meet soon. Make some decisions.
Okay, we'll make arrangements for that meeting. Thank you for your input tonight. Moving on, item 9, discussion or action to consider a Class A retail beer license for Smith's Marketplace. Presenter be Annette Spenlove, our city recorder. I guess you pick up on 10 as well.
Yeah, where did Mayor and Council, Smith's has applied for their retail beer license. It's a Class A. That's a license to vend beer. They can sell it out of their store. And it's been signed off by the Chief of Police. Their backgrounds have all been done. And we recommend that you go ahead and approve this beer license.
Mayor, I'd move that we approve the Class A retail beer license for Smith's Marketplace.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilman Swanson to consider or to approve Class A retail license for Smith's Marketplace. It's been seconded by Councilman Severine. Begin the voting with Councilman Severine.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Yeah. Item
Okay.
10.
Item 10, the next license, Mayor and Council, is for Hug Hess. Hug Hess has applied for a Class B beer license. That's to serve beer at their restaurant, and they also have their backgrounds all look good, and the chief has signed off on this also.
Mayor, I move that we approve the Class B beer license for Hug Hess.
It's been moved by Councilwoman Stoker to approve the Class B beer license for Hug Hess.
Second.
And second by Councilman Swanson. Any other discussion? We'll begin the voting with Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilman Severie.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
A motion to recess our active agenda and convene an RDA.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we recess our active agenda and reconvene, or to convene an RDA. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Begin with number 1, discussion or action to consider retaining wall improvements in a redevelopment area at approximately 300 East and Pleasant View Drive. Our presenter will be John Call.
So, Council, this, as you remember, is something that was presented to us by Dave Gordon, who owns and operates the Quality Quick Print as well as Northern Ice over on 300 East. Let me pull up the satellite version of it. And what we're talking about,
thank you,
or what's been proposed is a retaining wall right here along the pathway, the trail that's here. And it would vary in height based on the depth, but I believe right now we're estimating the highest point would be about 6 feet. You all have a packet. It's the same pictures that were shown in your original packet. The one thing you do have that's an exception is a piece of, for lack of a better word, protected information about a bid that was given to Dave by a potential contractor. That they just, it's a bid, so it's private until we did an official bid opening on this type of a project. The idea would be that the wall would cost the I'm going to get it confused. The RDA somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 to put this improvement in. It would help clean up the area and hopefully promote some economic development. On that second page of the flyer, there's an overview or an overhead picture, that second one down at the bottom, that shows where the second proposed building that Mr. Gordon has planned to put on that property is going to go, as well as the additional parking lot. So this wall would help facilitate that development. There's not a firm deadline on when that would start, but we told you to bring this back to the RDA so that the redevelopment agency can decide if they want to reinvest redevelopment area funds into this project. And Dave is here, and he can answer more questions than I have. And so if you have any others for me, I can answer them, and then I'm sure that Dave will answer others.
As I remember, John, the primary impetus for this is that we have water that flows off of the city property and onto the landowner's property. Is that correct? Down the slope, and this will mitigate the removal of that water, stop it from flowing?
It would help dramatically. I'll see if I can show you kind of a street view of the angle. So, as proposed, put my pointer away. The wall would be going along this property, so this would become a flat area with backfill behind and landscaping it, which would, in theory, hold the water from just crossing the property. It would still probably percolate to the bottom of that wall, but there'd be a drain at the bottom of that wall to carry the water away from the wall.
As I remember, Dave, you had proposed that drain would drop off into one of the storm drains that are already on your property. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Other questions for Dave?
I make a motion that we go ahead and build the retaining wall, use the improvement from the RDA for approximately 300 East and Pleasant View Drive.
Second.
It's been moved that we approve.
You need a dollar amount with that?
It'd be good to give a maximum amount so that when we get the bids back, we know.
You
we're
said
not
between
exceeding.
40 and 50,000, so.
I think we said 40 and 60 in the, because there might be a need to put a fence at the top.
I saw what the price was, so maximum of 60,000. I'll add that to my motion.
Okay. It's been made a motion by Councilman Turner that we approve the retaining wall improvements in the redevelopment area at approximately 300 East and Pleasant View Drive up to $60,000.
Second.
And second by Councilman Swanson. Any other discussion? We'll begin the vote with Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson. Councilman, sorry,
ahead, Phil.
Stoker, Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
I'm looking at one face and talking to the other one.
Yes.
Councilman.
You confuse that. Yes.
Councilman Swanson. Councilman Severy.
Yes.
Motion approved. Thank you.
May I comment?
No.
I have a question thing. So David Gordon, 300 2650 North. Since I put together the drawings and the plans, would you like me to update those with anything else before you have them to go out to bid, or do you have enough information from me to be able to go out to bid?
I'll get with you and we'll connect on.
Okay.
On what
Any
we need.
changes that you want?
I think we probably have good enough for the detail that a contractor would need.
Okay.
You guys could meet at the Cafe Rio and then walk to Northern Ice for dessert. That walking area.
For dessert.
Yeah.
Just make sure you're careful around the stump.
Okay, council, I would consider a motion to adjourn the RDA agenda and reconvene a regular meeting.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilman Swanson.
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilman Turner. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The active agenda now, any other public comments from this group? Seeing none, we'll move on to council, mayor, and staff comments. I would mention at this time, just to bring you up to date as far as projects are concerned in our business district, we have Arby's coming, have Starbucks coming. Wells Fargo, of course, will be moving to a new location within the city. O'Reilly's is coming in, and an ice cream shop is coming in at the North Ogden Cannery property, and Great Harvest is no longer there. And then there's a physical therapy facility going in where the old Sonic used to be. That's just a matter of bringing you up to date on some of the development that's occurring in the city.
So just out of curiosity, Mayor, you say a Starbucks is coming?
Yes.
Is the one in Smith's going to not be there, or is it going to stay there too? Oh, okay.
Yeah, both of them will stay. Their market study says they've got enough support for those uses that people can get their whatever their favorite drink while they're shopping or their favorite drink while they're driving.
Okay, any comments from Councilman Turner?
Just John or Annette, with my current situation at work, do I need to talk to the IT guys to have my email forwarded to my work email until or can I figure out a way to do it? Pardon me?
Yeah, we'll put you in touch with him. It's just a simple forwarding thing in the council or in the city email system.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Councilman Severy?
Nothing today.
Okay, Councilman Swanson?
Just one quick thing. I wanted to commend Andra Jones, our animal services officer. Just happened to be passing by on 3550 late last week and saw her with a couple of beautiful German Shepherd and a black lab and helped her load them in. The Shepherd was probably 120, 130 pounds. It was a big dog. But happened to have an individual who wanted to post missing those two animals on the Brent Taylor's Facebook page, which we don't do those kinds of posts, but it was those two dogs. Was able to get that individual in touch with Andra on Saturday, and Andra on her day off met them down at the kennel and was happy to give them their dogs and not make them wait throughout the entire weekend. She's a real credit to our city and the kind of service that our officers and our employees give the residents. So pat her on the back. She did a great job, and the resident was very, very grateful.
Thank you. We'll give that proper recognition.
That's
Thank
all
you.
I have.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Also on that same note, from the Parks and Rec Department, the last snowstorm that we had, and the resident said to me that the snowplow that they used, or it was like a lawnmower with a plow on it, and they cleared off the walkway at McGriff. And they said that was wonderful. They said it blew that snow clear down to Washington, but it left it so everybody could walk around it. And they said whoever did that, thanks. So
That was amazing. I received a lot of comments on that as well.
They were just real happy with that one too. So we do have great workers, city employers. That's all I have.
Thank you. John?
There'll be a little bit of an update on major projects next week, with our work session. We haven't had a regular work session for a while. But just so you know, the BHI, who are doing the debris basin up on 3100 near the divide, they are getting their documents together and expected to proceed next week with the beginning of construction. They actually, part of their, I think I mentioned to you, they were quite a bit cheaper than many of the other contractors, and that's in large part because they're taking all the material off the hill and moving it to another project. So they're using the part of the cost savings for us is them getting the material for free that they need on another property, although they are shipping it all the way to Syracuse. So they're going to be driving a long ways with those trucks.
Excuse me.
So, and other than that, that's it, Mayor.
Okay. Annette?
I'm going to go up to the microphone. That's okay.
You only get 5 minutes.
Okay, I can do it. Last council meeting, we had talked about bonding, and I've been in touch with the people that have the information. You guys can do a GO bond, a general obligation bond, for an election, and you can do it for this November 5th. You can do one time a year to raise, and you're raising taxes with the GO bond, and so it goes to the vote of the people. And one of the first steps, the legal steps, is you have to pass a resolution on what project you're going to do it with all the information in it and the purpose for it, all those kinds of things in July. And I believe it's by July 22nd. You need to do that to get it on the ballot. There's lots of other things that come into play on this, but council needs to decide what project they want to do if they're going to do this. I mean, you've talked about a couple, but you can only do one. You can't combine them.
And so the idea would be, council, if, as we talked about at our last meeting about when the police station was going in, if the council wanted to bond for it, the idea would be July 2nd or whatever of any year is going to be the deadline to get something on the ballot. And if you want it to be voted on by the general populace, then it has to be a GO bond, which requires a tax increase to cover the cost of the bond. The other bonds that are available to the city council are not public voted bonds, though they would be referable based on what the council passed. So, but that's because there's a different type of money that's dedicated, whether it's sales tax or
Impact fee.
Yeah, they have other types of revenue type bonds that you can go after that can't go to a public vote. So it's kind of a give and take on that one.
Do we know how much, at least like a ballpark on what it's going to cost to build the police department?
About 4 million, 5 million.
4 million?
So Heber City built a large and quite expensive one for $8 million. That was 24,000 square feet. And I believe our current building is 8,000 square feet. So
And Heber's has every bell and whistle in it. They went way out.
It includes city council. I mean, it included city offices and everything.
It had the justice court, and was the fire in that?
I can't remember, but the chief is getting together a list of all the new facilities that have been constructed, how big they are, what they have, how many offices are in the buildings, and how much they cost.
It sounds like something that big wouldn't be accommodated over here, would it?
If you did a 12,000 with a basement, then you'd be that big. But I'm not sure that's how big we need. We're also going to reach out to some architects who specialize in public safety buildings to say how big. What's the minimum we can get by? What's the right or the best amount, and then what's in excess. So
again, the bond would be between $4 and $5 million.
That would be the bond amount, which means the payoff amount would be another $3 to $4 million on top of that. So
it'll be less expensive for us for elections if you do it during an election year.
During a municipal election year.
Municipal election year. It doesn't mean you have to do it this year. You could do it next year. We'll have municipal elections. No, we won't. No. 2 years.
And council, I think you all would agree with the statement that right now we're just exploring what it takes. There's not any sort of a time frame or anything on the table of we're planning to do it. Just to make it clear that sometimes the newspaper will watch the video after the fact, and we don't have plans to issue a bond. We're just in the initial looking at how we would pay for the public safety facility or possibly the finishing out Barker Park, the grass portion on the north end of the hollow. So.
That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. I would entertain a motion now to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Turner to adjourn and seconded by Councilwoman Stoker. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.